So we have a number of questions, and I think one way of classifying them is that there are questions of clarification based on your talk, and then there are some larger questions. So maybe we'll go in that order, and we are definitely interested in questions from the audience, but we're just going to sort of, since quite a number of you took the time to submit questions, we'll begin with those. So the first question was a question clarifying your discussion of the underlying Polish word for conscious. And I'll just read the question. You had said, this person wrote, Janet showed how the proper understanding of the Polish word translated as conscious refers to being vividly aware of some reality in a manner which is both intellectual and emotional. Is this a sudden disturbance of one's reality of becoming conscious? And if so, what launches this intrusion of something other? Is it a response to one searching or an unexpected revelation?
I think it can be many things. First of all, I do want to emphasize that it's not just this vivid awareness, but it is an acceptance of it. And Professor John Crosby recommended the word an ownership of the truth. All right, it's not just something that you intellectually understand and even recognize as true, but it's something that you own or you embrace. You make your own truth. And it seems to me, again, it can come many ways. The alternatives I think I'm given in that email is that one, it could be a sudden epiphany. And I gave an example of that with some people hear my talk on contraception, why not? And at the end of the hour, they have an epiphany that that's a truth, and it's a truth they want to live their life by. I think many other people arrive at different truths because of a long study and seeking of it. And after a period of time, they find the truth and some truth and commit themselves. I think it can be, a progressive thing. When I'm thinking when I was a young person, my mother had a baby when I was 11 and another when I was 13. And over a period of years, you just become aware that babies need parents and that you shouldn't be having babies unless you're married. And it just became gradual. It's like the babies are wonderful, they're great fun and everything, but there's a lot of work. And they need parents. And so it wasn't so much an intellectual truth that someone explained to me, but just through experience, I came to understand that truth. So I think this consciousness that we're talking about can come about through many paths, but it is this clarity that there's a truth, an important truth. You see the truth of it. You're glad that it's true. It's not, again, once being oppressive to your nature, but it's one fulfilling of your nature, and you commit your life to living in accord with that truth.
Thank you. There was a comment that you made in your talk that struck a number of people, and I wanted to ask it because I think it was a way of formulating this that was unfamiliar to many of us. So you had said that Wojtyła was not primarily interested in metaphysics. It was ethics that was his great love, but that he knew he needed a metaphysics, and so he chose the Thomistic metaphysics. So I think to many of us that was a surprise because, particularly with the emphasis on Thomistic personalism, for example, in the work of Norris Clarke, there is the feeling of a much greater ordination between personalism and the Thomistic metaphysics.
Well, I'm sorry to say I'm not familiar with the work of Norris Clarke, so I may change my answer if I read that. But again, Wojtyła was initially, as a philologist, someone who loved poetry and literature and drama. And when he has this beautiful passage about when he first encountered Thomism, and it just ignited him with just delight that someone could think in such an orderly fashion about reality. And he said that it really corresponded to the way that he thought about things, but he had never seen anything so systematic and deep. But I do think his passion was the person, and the acting person, how we form ourselves through our choices. Again, our dignity is being able to know the truth and act in accord with the truth. And any Thomist knows, again, you have to know about reality to know where the human person fits within reality. And the fundamental terms of metaphysics, such things as substance and accidents and actuality and potentiality, are extremely important for understanding reality. And you will find these terms used especially in personal community when he's talking about different philosophical systems and his own Aristotelian Thomistic commitments. In a certain sense, so much of life is actualizing our potencies. And he talks that way, but again, as I said, if you're a Thomist, you're going to have a lot of trouble in life by trying to explain substance and accident. I usually take, half an hour, 40 minutes anytime I introduce those words to students, because they don't have any idea what they mean, and if they were to guess, they'd get it really badly wrong. And so if you can find other terms and not trip yourself up that way, and I think to some extent Wojtyła tried it. So you won't find, at least I haven't found, I'll be interested in what Nora Clark finds, that John Paul II was interested in a certain sense, advancing or probing much about the Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics. He found the terms, he found the concepts true and useful, right? And so he used them. I think the whole notion of the intellect and the will and the passions, as far as the anthropology was concerned, was extremely important. Obviously, the notion of virtue, actualizing your potencies in respect to virtue, perfecting yourself, your telos, all of this is absolutely present everywhere in Wojtyła's thinking. But ultimately, he wanted to move towards, I think, this notion of being conscious and taking ownership over things. And again, I think it's a caricature of Thomism to think it wasn't there, and maybe he's a bit at fault at that. But he really did want to emphasize that caricature is not what is true about reality, that all we have to do is basically memorize the principles of the catechism and then just kind of robotically apply them to any situation in which we find ourselves. So, you're a young person and you're attracted to someone, well, fornication is wrong, I won't fornicate, all right? And not sort of to struggle with what all of that means in your system. Why is it that I have a desire to fornicate? Why with this person? What would that mean? What would that mean about myself? What would that mean about my treatment of other people? And that sort of probing all of that, which just, if there's one of the questions I know is the difference between Thomism and more differences between Thomism and personalism is certainly the method. Thomas is very deductive, but it is also true that all deduction must be preceded by induction. Right? Induction means, again, thinking about reality and all its variety and diversity and trying to pull out some truth. Right? You look at all sorts of different kinds of friendships and you try to come up with a definition of friendship. Right? Aristotle did it in 2 books, which is pretty cool. Came up with 3 kinds of friendship. And then he talked about different kinds of friendships, equal and unequal friendships, and lots of different things. 2 books. A phenomenologist could write 1 book about one small aspect of friendship. All right? A phenomenologist does not want to miss a detail or a nuance of reality. All of them are important. And so it's not so much where since Thomas is getting somewhere, he's getting to a definition to put in a systematic way in a whole scenario. And so, in some sense, Thomas says man's a rational animal. And for Thomas, that's like you want to do cartwheels and you want to, just be so excited. You got it. You nailed it. Rational animal. A phenomenologist goes like, oh, it doesn't begin to capture what the human being is. We sing and we dance and we swim and we do all these things. We hit each other and we kick each other. We do all these things. And where does that fit into rational animal? And so it seems to me, again, if Thomas wrote on shame, which I'm sure he did, it would be 1 article, maybe 1 question. You could expand that, again, into a book. But the phenomenologist wants to write the book. Thomas wants to write the article, right? And that's, I think, a great difference between the 2 of them, is Thomas wants to get the whole of reality in a system, and a phenomenologist wants to pick a good topic and exhaust that topic, and then get another good topic and exhaust that topic. And then maybe you'll get a pattern when you're done with it, but it doesn't much matter, because the exhaustion of that one topic is just so exhilarating that that's pretty good accomplishment for your lifetime.
Great.
So we'll take a few more questions here, but begin being ready to raise your questions, because we'll turn to the audience here in just a moment. And in fact, if you don't hear me handling your question here, don't be discouraged from raising it. In some cases, it may be better to have you articulate your own question than for me to read what was submitted. So here's a question that I think will interest many people, and I don't want to put you in a box, but from a Thomistic perspective, what would you say to us personalists, with an understanding that there are many types of us in this room, what are areas beyond the kind of thing that we're doing now, which is very important, that deserve our attention, or where you think we could make particular contributions? And I don't just mean in academia, I mean in the world and in the many problems presented to us.
Again, one of the reasons I think phenomenology is just so incredibly important right now is, again, if you're going to be an Aristotelian Thomist, you're going to spend a lot of time explaining a lot of terms: substance, accidents, potency, actuality, nature. You spend hours and hours and hours. And most people feel like they're being thrust into what philosophers do is they sit in some room somewhere and make up difficult terms and sort of force reality into those categories. And they don't want to do that, right? And they say, okay, well, there's Descartes and there's Aquinas and there's all these people and they all have their own systems and that's just one system, and I don't want to learn a system. And phenomenology has the advantage of at least having the appearance of going to the things in themselves and saying, all right, well, let's just talk about love, and let's talk about your experience of love, and let's see what we can flesh out about love from talking about the many diversities: parental love, sibling love, romantic love, and again, talk about these in a fairly fulsome way. Not so much trying to drive towards a definition in any kind of hasty fashion, but trying to show people that they already have a lot of data at hand that allows them to think about something, and we're not imposing anything on them that they can't derive, in a sense, from their own experience. So whether you're talking about their own experience or novels or movies or something, you're talking about something they've experienced. And you're trying to bring something out of that experience, some truth. And since I think people aren't in touch with themselves, they're not in touch with their experience, and they don't know how much the truth of the church actually correspond with experience, first you have to get them knowing themselves and knowing their experience. And I think phenomenology can be extremely helpful for that. And then maybe leading people to the rigors of, and I'm not saying it's not rigorous, but that's not the foremost importance. The foremost importance, in the sense, is being certainly true, getting in accord with the truth, but getting in accord with the truth through a kind of exhaustive exploration of something. And then when you've done that, you have something that you can build with to do more things.
In Van Hildebrand and in some of his peers, there's also an emphasis on phenomenology as sifting through all of the influences, including those influences that may be subtle, so that one can really have access to the thing. And that seems to be a great contribution today, because we're all, even those of us who are fairly conscious of our influences, are still bombarded with messages that seek to influence us.
Yeah, and I mean, there's certainly a correspondence and parallel in Aquinas, where he does his, so many objections, and then he does his sed contra, and then he does his explanation, and then his replies to everything, and he's responding to falsehoods. But in our culture, people they really can't do that anymore. I mean, if you list a bunch of falsehoods, they don't know even how to start thinking. Well, everything's just a matter of opinion. So you have these three opinions, and now you have someone who gives another opinion back to those three opinions, and what do you have? You just have one opinion in dialogue with other opinions, and they just don't know how to follow an argument. So instead of starting out by helping people follow an argument, which you have to get to. You have to hope to get them to be able to follow an argument. But first they have to get in touch with reality. And I think you do that by, again, having them describe in a sense, and get in touch with their experience and experience of others.
I think this is a good moment to segue to the audience. We've aired some of the topics that you all have raised. So Catherine Yanko, do you have so Catherine has the mic. I think Rabbi Mark, do you want?
Thank you again, Dr. Smith. This has been a real treasure to have you here with us. very much, I think, in the spirit of the points that you were just articulating. You know, we live in an era and within a larger culture that has, you know, many fault lines, and one of them that you've written about and you've thought a lot about is the question of homosexuality and being theologically and pastorally responsible in this very challenging arena. I think I've shared with John Henry and maybe some others that I think the power of personalism as a philosophical school of thought is its ability to articulate both through practical public reason, you know, arguments that come from foundations and premises that you could share with people that might not understand the biblical tradition or the Jewish Orthodox or Catholic tradition. But even at our best, when we articulate using resources like von Hildebrand or Wotia or Soloveitchik, the culture that we're sort of amassed against or that we're facing sometimes needs other types of responses, more pastoral and less theological, perhaps. And I've been directed by some of my Catholic friends to a movement which many of you in this room would probably be familiar with, called spiritual friendship. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested to get your candid take on the value, the potential virtues, the vices, the liabilities in thinking through this issue of how, as an educator, I work with teenagers and millennials, and this is, I think, the most profound issue facing my own children. I have 20-year-olds and 19, younger, and they want to know, they know what they're supposed to believe, they know what the tradition is, but there's so much static and so much interference from the broader culture that it goes beyond just the rationality of the tradition. It has to be embraced in a total way, in a social way, in a cultural way. And this one approach, argues for a particular strategy, and I was curious what your thoughts were on
Yes, I encountered it a couple years ago for the first time and had some various exchanges with some of the leaders and the participants in this spiritual friendship group. So far as I can tell, it's kind of very quieted down over the last couple of years. For a while, my Facebook and Twitter feed was filled with stuff about spiritual friendship, and now I'm not seeing that so much. So I don't know I think part of it is Ron Belgaw is trying to finish his PhD dissertation and just doesn't have time to be doing a lot of things. But the spiritual friendship, if people aren't aware of it, it is a largely Catholic, but also other Christians, individuals who experience same-sex attraction, but are committed to lives of chastity. Right? They're committed to lives of chastity. Those who are Catholic are ready to embrace the fullness of the Church's teaching on sexuality. But one of the most controversial premises that they have is that they can enter into a vowed relationship with a person of the same sex, a lifetime vowed relationship of friendship. Right? They find a precursor for this, I think, invalidly in St. Elward of Rievaulx. So it seems to me that most of us see a lot of problems with that, starting with the word temptation, occasion of sin, inappropriate emotional attachments to other people. It's appealing to many people because and this is something we all have to profoundly understand, is that anybody who suffers same-sex attraction believes that if they live a life of chastity, they are going to have a profoundly lonely life, right? That they are not going to experience love and intimacy, right? That their life is just going to be sitting home alone, basically. And they won't have experienced the joy and just the delight of having someone know you and love you and know and love someone else, right? They don't think they're ever going to have that. And they're just going to live sort of in the darkness and sort of watching everybody else have a good time. And we have to realize that that's what people who are who maybe haven't entered into the gay world or gay lifestyle, those are coming out of it, they're saying, well, what do you have to offer me? All right, what you seem to have to offer me is just profound loneliness. So this is their solution, if you will, to the fear of profound loneliness. And it's precisely why young people are so incredibly accepting of people with same-sex attractions and in same-sex relationships and even same-sex marriage and even adopting children, because we tend to know that those, romance, marriage, children, family is a pretty good path to happiness in this world. And it seems like we are refusing to allow a group of the population to follow that path. And for the most part, the religious life is off limits to people who suffer same-sex or experience same-sex attraction. So I don't believe it's a good solution. I think that they have let us see a reality that's very important for us to see and to know what the needs are. And I think that one thing is that friendship has been a very impoverished notion in our culture. And even love. We do live still in the world of the myth of romantic love, oddly enough, even though most of the sex in our culture is so raw and impersonal. The notion that there's some special someone out there for you that's going to make you happy and that you're going to make happy, we can't quite put that aside. And so everybody sort of wants that. But we've lost the idea that intense friendship with your siblings, with your nieces and nephews, with, again, friends that you've made in college that don't have the least bit of sexual attraction to them, but are kindred spirits, right? Living a life together. Soldiers have something of this for the most part, where they have an incredible love of brotherly love and brotherly love. You die for these people. And the soldier, one of the appeals of being a soldier to many men is that you do fall in love with other men, all right, and you're willing to lay down your life for them. That shows that there's something there, all right? And we haven't learned to, or even for your grandparents, the love that people can have can be very intense, and it can be one of delight in another person who knows you and cares for you. We tend to diminish those as if that's not much, all right? And the point is, it's really quite spectacular if you really commit yourself to it. And I think it's the idea that you can find a person of the same sex that you feel really a kind of romantic love for, and have this friendship doesn't recognize a good understanding of human nature. But one final thing, maybe it's not final. A number of those that I've talked to about it, oddly enough, aren't talking about that. You can find that in what they write, but I talked to Eve Tushnet. She'd like to have a vowed friendship with one of her friends who's married to a man, her best friend. And I said, what's the point of that? You want to say, well, how many do you want to have? Can you have it with more than one person? Can you have it with someone who has a vowed relationship with someone else? And I said, what would that bring to your life that you don't have? And she said, well, if my car broke down or I had to go to the hospital, I know that there'd be somebody who would be there for me. And I want to say, you don't need a vowed friendship for that. We should all hopefully have a couple people in our life that you could, have on your fast dial, that when you're stuck by the side of the road and need some help, they'll get there if they possibly can. A man named Wesley Smith, I think is his name, or is that Hill? I forget. Pardon? Wesley. What's the last name? Hill. Yes, a very, very splendid writer, not a Catholic but a Christian, and it really probes his own struggle with same-sex attraction and his Christian commitment. And I believe has a vowed friendship with a married couple, not with one person of the married couple, but with the married couple. Basically for the same reason that Eve was talking about, people that will make certain I have somewhere to go on holidays, and that are always glad to have me stop by and care about me. You want to say, again, you shouldn't need a vowed relationship, but clearly for them, those two instances have nothing about romance in them. So those of us who portray it as a romantic relationship aren't capturing what everyone in the spiritual friendship movement means. And if it does I have at least one friend who, he has a hard life because of his same-sex attraction. And I've tried to make it very clear to him that I am here for him. you know, and that if there's anything he needs, call me. And I think it gives him, and it's the same thing with several of his siblings. So he has a security that I think almost any single person needs, but because of those particular wounds, they might be particularly more fragile in those respects. So I think one of the best things that any of us can do for people that we know who are suffering same-sex attraction is to be good friends, really good friends. Call them and ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they have someplace to go on Thanksgiving. Make certain that they have people in their lives who are very interested in them in their struggles. And even if they're active in the lifestyle, don't let that be a deterrent, you know, for calling them and asking them, what can I pray for? How can I help you? How can I be there for you? So I don't know if that helps. Courage is one of the best ways to go. The organization Courage, which is a support group for people with same-sex attraction. And they're very much like Alcoholics Anonymous, a very structured spiritual life, which I honestly think sometimes every one of us should go through the 12-step program. We'd all be better off if we did.
Okay, 1, 2. Can we see a show of hands?
Okay.
We'll try. So over there. Go to Anthony, and then, do you have a question?
Well, you have a question.
Oh, okay.
You have one of her questions.
I do have one of her questions, yeah. Go ahead, Anthony.
Thank you. That was a wonderful answer. Thank you for that. I want to move on. So since you kind of moved into, let's say, the pastoral kind of area, I want to raise a question about the marital relationship. So I love your perspective on phenomenology and going to lived experience rather than what appears to be perhaps a more toneless kind of imposition of these are the laws or these are the rules that apply. And my question is with regard to a married couple where the couple are at very different places in terms of their moral or faith development. And so you can have a rule or a law that says, you know, here's the church teaching, for argument's sake, on contraception or sexuality, which appears to many people to be, if you fail to reach this point, everything below that is inherently evil. And so in a marital relationship where you may have a couple has to achieve a high bar, not just an individual, say with virtue, I'm going to be prudent or temperate, but you know, we need to achieve mutual chastity in this relationship. Can you comment on, perhaps from a phenomenological perspective, that experience and how that couple could perhaps grow together towards the goal, if you like, of vision of mutual chastity?
I don't know if this is quite what you're looking at, but the kind of question I often get is from one of the spouses, say, is very enthusiastic and committed to the church's teaching on contraception, and the other spouse is not. And I don't know if that would be one of the possibilities. Right. And, you know, I'd say, well, there's a couple things. You know, in most things when there's some difficulty, and maybe spouses, I learned this from spouses, so it's not my own wisdom, but there's that old phrase, killing them with kindness, right? Which is a very good phrase. Not killing, but overwhelming them with kindness, right? And oftentimes, one spouse, the one who, say, doesn't accept the church's teaching on anything, it doesn't matter whether it's contraception or going to mass on Sunday or whatever, they're quite threatened by by the spouse's piety or religiosity, and really feel that maybe God is more important in their life than they are, which of course is true, and it should be true. But and a person shouldn't be angry that that's the case. But what the non-believing spouse or non-accepting spouse needs to understand is that when one spouse is becoming closer to God, everything is getting better in their life instead of worse, right? That if you're becoming more of a believer, you are becoming more attentive to your spouse, more concerned about your spouse, want to spend more time with your spouse, want to please your spouse more. Not something that takes you away from the home and takes you away from being with your spouse, but it's something that in every way enhances the relationship. You certainly want to let the spouse know, especially if it's something like contraception, but you get their sympathetic caring by saying, you know, we are a very thoughtful, considerate, loving person. I know you care about me. I need you to understand something that's very important to me. and lay it out as that. You know, it's not that this is God's law and the church's law and you must obey it, but you know, people marry people for a reason, and often it's because they love them, all right? And that they do want to, in some way, honor them. And so you make this not just honoring God and the church, but really honoring me and my commitments. And I'm trying to honor you in your commitments, even if it's in very trivial things, watching their movies, watching the sports they like, you know, making their favorite meals, if it's the woman dressing as he likes you to dress, all sorts of things to just show that he is extremely important in your life. And this is what you do when someone's extremely important, and that gives him a lesson, a certain sense of what he's supposed to do for you with what's extremely important about you. And that's part of it is part of the journey, and there's gonna be dozens of things like that, if not hundreds, in married life, where one spouse has to try to work to bring the other spouse around to what is the right way of doing things. But you rarely do it by slamming the catechism on the desk and say, read section such and such. You know?
Yes, my observation more is that the church is kind of slamming the catechism on the desk, so the spouse, one spouse can sometimes feel quite alienated by that perceived. You
might give him the mic, please. Yeah.
Sorry, so I was just saying that the partner may not be slamming the catechism on the desk, so to speak, but one of the spouses may feel the church is doing that.
Yes, and that's why you have to make it not so much about the church, but you have to say it's about me and my commitments, and this is deeply important to me. And of course, it's deeply important to you because it is the church and it is God, and all that can be brought into it. But I think that's the other person is not relating to God and is not relating to the church, so why would they care? But they are relating to you, right? And if you've been doing this, just overwhelming them with attention and kindness, they want to keep that going. And so this should be a part of that scenario.
Do you want to ask your question?
I just don't have it. I wrote it down.
Oh. All right, I'm going to ask Amanda's question. This is in a more practical direction, but I think it interests us all. Do we have examples of stories, art, and media within our culture that effectively contribute to enthusing people about the truths of Humanae Vitae? If so, what are some examples?
There's a few things, not enough, of course, because the church works more as, the world works more as a negative example, of course, for what happens if we're not living by the church's teaching on sexuality. I try to point that out every once in a while to people. I teach in Detroit. 80% of the babies born in Detroit are born to a single mother. And I said, suppose all those babies been born into a household with a father. Anybody have an idea that things might be different? It's just like, whoa, everything would be different. Everything would be different for that woman and for her children and for that man, everything. So a lot of it is that negative examples. Now we want inspiring examples.
Yes, we do.
But we do. People can, for some reason I have a dearth right now. I heard that ahead of time and I prayed and I said, God, show me something. I don't have much. One thing is people are having babies and are loving it. People like Serena Williams, 36, had her first baby. And she loves tennis, but she loves her baby more. Then there's all these female tennis players that are talking about, I had a baby and I love tennis, but I love my baby more. Even these starlets are starting to have babies much earlier, and they really like their baby body even. Their pregnant body is something that they're proud of, And I think something like that we need to comment on to people, that there's a natural joy in having children. People to some extent, like Jim Gaffigan, I'm not crazy about everything he's done, but they've got 5 kids and live in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City, and he's a comedian that tells great jokes about family life. Some things like that. But I've shown some movies and some things where you can point out certain truths. If you've never seen The Painted Veil, watch that movie, The Painted Veil. And it really is the themes of love and responsibility kind of writ large. So I'd recommend that. So afterwards, if people have ideas, come and give them to me. So if I get that question again, I'll do a better job.
And also just even let's all kind of consider throughout the let's all consider throughout the seminar the recommendations we can give to each other, because we all have maybe one and then together quite a list.
There you go.
And since we're so saturated with the negative examples, I think it's also really worthwhile to consider what might those positive examples be that are not so explicitly, like, they don't need to be Catholic. In fact, it might be better if they're not.
Right.
And so, yeah, like just decent, solid stuff.
Stories.
Stories.
Right. Well, I'm kind of crazy.
Yeah, of that, just so as we think of examples or.
Okay. Well, can you? I only wrote it on this piece of paper. I don't what was my question?
It's about examples of stories, art, and media within our culture that contribute to enthusing people about the truth of Humanae Vitae.
I honestly think that young couples who have 1, 2, 3, 4 children, when on a day that they're sort of feeling good about themselves and their children, should take them, I'm serious about this, should take them to a college campus and just walk all over that campus and let people come up to your kids and say how cute they are, and you look as happy as you can about these kids. And it's an enormous service, because we honestly do have a natural part of us that wants to be a parent. And at a certain age, it's overwhelming if it gets ignited, all right? And unfortunately, we live in these ghettos where college campus is a ghetto. You may never see a family. You may never see children. And you need this in your face and saying, I want that. And I want this little unit that rides their little bikes and buys their little ice cream cones. And not that that's what it's all about, but that's a really nice seduction into the whole family. I'm very serious about that. I think people should do that a lot.
It's subversive in the best sense of the term.
Yeah, oh, I love subversion, my gosh.
Well, we experience that with our small children, and I know there are other families here that you go into places where that are just downright sad, and people are cut off from the vitality of a family, and you just show up with your kids, and the cuteness factor is very powerful.
I've been working with a young woman in inner city Detroit, all these single mothers that lives are unbelievably hard, but the joy that they take in their children, it's just wonderful, you know. And we can all look at it as a sadness. We say, "Oh my gosh, you're living on welfare and you don't have a job and you're living in squalor and your kids aren't going to get this." But oh my gosh, the kids just are, for the most part, pretty down happy, and the mothers are so happy to have these kids. They can have it a whole lot better, and they should have it a whole lot better. But tons, as you say, the happiness in this world is because of children. And we have to just keep stressing that to people. If you want to be happy, this is the right path.
So I'm trying to keep some track of the question. So I think there was Jennifer, and then actually I think you were first. So I'll let you go, and then Jennifer, and then did you have a question? Okay.
I'm Grady Stuckman, and I wanted to ask about how St. Thomas suggests we practice reverence.
Well, Professor Wallstein is right there.
Professor Smith is right there.
Oh, reverence, I think honestly, and it is so beautiful that at the end of Theology of the Body, it is all about the piety that men and women are meant to have for each other and for the gift of sexuality. And so I think a lot of it has to be contemplative prayer. It has to be just trying to get in touch with the beauty of God's creation. And reverence really does mean, I think it means looking at something and seeing the divine in it and knowing that it needs to be rightly treated. You can't just exploit it for your own purposes. You can't use it or desecrate it. It's something, another person really is holy, and you don't want it. John Paul II, beautiful, and this does help young people. The difference between using and loving, right? Reverencing is loving, using is desecrating. And almost every young person has been used in some way, and they know it and they hate it, right? So if you say doing this is using someone, they kind of get it. And if you say doing this is loving someone, they kind of get it. And it's a great hook for things. They don't understand the word reverence at all. They don't have any idea what reverence is. they not even, I'm not even certainly, I mean, my grandmother, you know, a peasant from Slovenia, she reverenced her pots and pans. I mean, you know, everyone was perfectly cleaned, every little, you never found any blackening of anything. It was scrubbed, and then you put it back in the original paper, and you put it back in the original box, and you put it deep underneath the sink, and then the next time you had to use it was the next meal, you had to take it out again. But it was all about reverencing. This is a precious thing that we worked hard for, you know, and it does great things. It makes great meals. So we're just not going to treat it as just nothing. So if you can have that kind of reverence for a pot, you know, the reverence you can have for a human being, but everything is a throwaway culture, as we said. Everything is a divorce culture. Everything is replaceable. Everything is changeable. And to sort of move kids to see what reverence is, something that you treasure so much, it is in a sense sacred. And that that's who they are, and other people are that. And people need to be treated for what they really are. So part of it, again, it really is contemplative prayer. It is realizing that this is God's universe, and it's a beautiful universe, and it's created for us. And getting that gratitude, the gratitude for what we've been given, and the gratitude will lead people to reverence things.
Jennifer, would you?
Thank you. I just have a brief question. It's in regard to that phrase, participated theonomy, that you had mentioned in Veritatis Splendor. So it really seems to refer to this idea of the natural law as being the first and fundamental participation in the eternal law. But I found it exciting, right? Because it seems to overcome kind of like that heteronomy versus autonomy.
Yes.
So I was wondering how we could pull it out, perhaps in terms of consciousness and better understanding.
I think it's a very important term, and I think I possibly want to do more with it than JP2 intended to do with it in Veritatis Splendor, because you say it's a bridge between heteronomy and autonomy. That I've tried to stress a couple of times, since we're made in the image and likeness of God, there's every reason to think that we should like all of the laws that God has made, because we're made in his image and likeness. And again, a bit like Kant, if we were to make the rules ourselves, these would be the rules that we would make, because they're fitting to our nature, and they're right, and they're fitting with the order of creation. But there's a couple other words that John Paul II uses that are so important. Couples are co-creators with God, co-creators. And this notion that we are in league with God, collaborators, participators, we share in God's project for the world. Having children is a share in God's project for the world. So this sort of participation, the way that we participate in what God is doing in the world, even in his laws, that's our we participate in that. Again, these aren't imposed from an exterior source. God has written them into our being, and by living in accord with our nature and our being, we are participating in God's universe. So I would love to see that phrase really embellished and elaborated.
So we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Okay, I think I know who the two are. So over here to Lupita.
So I have two questions, but I only want to pick one. So do you think that, so it's true that for a broken culture about sexuality, about the meaning of love, many women get pregnancy, unplanned pregnancy. So my question is that, do you think that those kids are like conceiving an unwanted pregnancy, or an unexpected and not wanted pregnancy, and they born, they like have this, like they carry this wound into their lives? I mean, and if that is so, I don't know if that's made clear, like if they are wounded by the way that they are conceived, if they carry that in a profound conscious level, I don't know. And if that's the case, like how's the way to heal that part of the process, how you're being into existence. I mean, we all are made of love for God, but what is our parents is not that the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm not certain I heard all of the question, but this question, are we wounded because so many people are brought into existence by a mistake, right? No, not an intentional, wanted pregnancy. And I mean, there's all sorts of studies that are showing that young people are harmed by the mere existence of abortion. You know, they feel that their lives are very tenuous, that someone else could have killed them just because they were inconvenient. And so their lives don't seem that valuable. If other babies are being killed, you know, I didn't get killed, but maybe I was just lucky. It doesn't mean I, pardon?
Like survivor guilt.
Survivor
Guilt.
guilt, yes, survivor guilt. That's right, a kind of survivor guilt. And I think even in our culture, it's such a divorce culture that even though there's a family in which it's perfectly obvious in the sense that there will never be a divorce in this household, the kids don't really believe that because they've seen their friends who thought their parents were married forever and they get divorced. So every child lives with a kind of fear that someday they'll go home and either mom or dad has moved out. So there's a way in which the wreckage of our culture reaches into the homes that are very secure and have all the right values because of their familiarity with their peers. And I think in most everything, I mean, it's a matter of sacrifice. Love is best shown by being willing to make sacrifices for other people. And again, even these women I know in inner city Detroit who are having these babies, they really do love their babies and they do really make incredible sacrifices for them. They could have aborted them and their lives would have been a lot easier, maybe, at least they could have thought that easily enough. So at least the kids know my mother in that instance didn't abort me, all right? And she's made this tremendous sacrifice for me by trying to give me a life even though it's really hard for her. So I think in a lot of ways we all have to be willing to sacrifice for all these wounded people and show them that we're really glad they're here and we're really sad they're suffering and we're really sad that they came into the world in this way because it's not fitting their dignity that it should have happened this way. So we have to do as much as we can, again, to celebrate the being here of anyone who's here as a great gift from God. But I do think those wounds are very real and that parents have to realize as well that even though they, in their household, they've set up the kind of right atmosphere, the outside is sneaking in and they have to do some conscious talking to their children about this is why it can't happen here, you know, even though you think it might, but because we're committed to these things. I don't know if that helps.
Final question.
I think they might need to hear about my excommunication at some point.
Oh, can I ask that?
What?
Should I ask that?
I think maybe you should.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Smith, for your talk this morning. This is kind of in a different direction, but I've been thinking about this question a lot. So it seems that St. Thomas has a view of the difference between male and female as something material and accidental, although connected to form. And I don't know much about phenomenology or personalism, but it seems that the personalist understands the difference between male and female as something more essential. So I was wondering what you thought of that. Can those two views be synthesized? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it would require just a massive dissertation that I'm personally could write maybe 3 sentences of. I mean, the Thomist does think that all individual differences arise from the matter, right? And that we, so far as I understand, that there is a human soul that we are given, and the individuation then of our being is because of what our matter brings to the situation. It brings a lot. I mean, first of all, it does bring our masculinity, our femininity, and then you have 2 extremely different entities. And then honestly, if you're Nordic or if you're African, there's going to be tremendous differences but between these 2 persons because of the whole genetics and atmosphere in which they are. So it's not as if what the matter brings, in a sense, is just sort of a happenstance, accidental, unimportant thing. It's profoundly impactful on a person's stance towards the world and receptivity to the world. I mean, as Aristotle and Thomas said, everything we have inside comes from the outside, and it comes through the body. So everything we've got in our brain and in our psyche and in our heart and soul has come through the body, and it's got to be influenced in some way by that. So that's, people just think that sort of we're like cookie cutters with a soul, and everybody just has some little different formation, but it's just a bunch of identical souls. Well, the minute that soul is infused in this sperm and ovum, it's individualized enormously because of what it's a part of. Other people want to say, of course, that there's a male soul and a female soul. That's a hard thing for Aristotelian Thomists to hold to, because the soul is our form or our essence, and it would seem that a male and a female are essentially different, and we don't want to say that. So I don't know, some Thomists have told me there's a middle ground there, where you could have a male or a female soul that doesn't put you in different species. I'm not getting it yet. I got it for 15 minutes once. I was really exhilarated, and then I lost it. So I don't know that there's a huge difference, again, between what phenomenologists and Thomists think about the male-female differences. I mean, that's a very good path to try to explore, but it's not something I really know a lot about. There's some man over there, Alex, has his hand up. I don't know if that's okay to go.
Yeah, sure. If you want to make a comment, please.
I mean, I think that this difference between male and female, it cannot be really comprehended enough using only hylomorphic categories. So this essential difference between male and female, between man and woman,
is not
can
essential.
be only understood in terms of eternal name, eternal vocation that we're giving from God. So Our Lady, she is a woman par excellence for the eternity. She's a mother for the eternity. Saint Joseph is a man. Jesus is a man for eternity because of this name that is given, this specific, unique relationship with the Creator. And that cannot be reduced to matter and form. These are just notions that are inadequate. But the difference is much more essential between, a man can never comprehend what does it mean to be a mother, right?
I know I can't comprehend what it is to be a teenage boy, so it's probably true.
Well, to take this in a totally different direction by way of conclusion, actually this is not my question. I was told to ask this question by Janet, so she obviously wants to speak about it. No, just to show you what a provocateur she is. But
I was reading the hearts and souls of people out there. It wasn't my question. I know it's what they want to know.
Apparently you have suffered some form of excommunication, and we'd all like to hear about that.
See, thank you. Thank you very much.
Sincerely.
I know, yeah. Wait, yeah. All right, let's take a little bit of time, but you might like it. All right. Has anybody else in this room been excommunicated? All right, I have. All right. How did that happen? I was in Rome for a meeting with the Holy Father, because I was a member of a group called ARCIC, the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission. Right? We Anglicans and Catholics are getting together to talk about some way of possibly reconciling. And we were in Rome for a week, and the people who wanted managed to get us a private meeting of the 19 of us with the Holy Father. So we were going to do this like at 11 o'clock, I think it was a Saturday morning. And everybody else, I don't need to give you all these irrelevant details, but the other 18 went to do something, and me being me went to do something else. And then I needed to reunite with them to go to this meeting. Come time for the meeting, there was just no way I could do that. They were over at the Scave offices by St. Peter's, and the crowd had expanded to such a group, that was such a huge number, that there's no way I could get through this crowd to get back there. So I'd been in Rome many times, and I knew where the bronze doors are, which gets you up into the places where these meetings usually happen. I don't even know where it's happening, but I'm assuming it's over there. So I elbow my way across St. Peter's Piazza, elbowing, scusi, prego, whatever I know how to say, all the way over there. And I randomly go up to a man that's wearing, looks like he's an official, just wearing not any of the usual Roman colorful garb, just a blue jacket. And I say to him, do you speak English? I said, well, now imagine being able to say this. I said, I'm late for a meeting with the Holy Father. Now, you'd think he would just slap me around or something, but he says, Archic? And I said, yes, Archic. And he said, well, where are the other 18? And I said, well, that's what I want to know. I said, I'm trying to find them. And he said, okay, well, there was a mile-long line to go through security. He said, but you go right over there and go talk to that woman over there. So I go to talk to this woman over there. She's on the phone, blah, 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 blah. And she keeps waving me, and I just stand there, and I say to her, I'm late for a meeting with the Holy Father. She says, let me see your passport, and I give it to her. She goes and checks, and she waves me to the steps that go up to the bronze doors, and there's, you know, there's two Swiss guards. And one of them takes that huge spear and he just slams it and he says, halt! And I practically fall back down the steps, you know, and I'm as stiff as I can be, and I'm not going to move because I know he's going to spear me. And this other guard, gorgeous, you know, comes sauntering down the steps and, you know, Signorina, can I help you? And I'm late for a meeting with the Holy Father. And he takes my passport and he says, well, come up the stairs now. And he says, I'm sorry, the meeting has already begun. And by the time you get there, it will be over. It's a very short meeting. And I'm standing there thinking, well, God didn't get me this far, that he's not going to do something interesting here. So I'm standing there, I say, could you reunite me with them? I'd like to get back together with them, at least after the meeting. And he said, well, there's a bus at the top of these stairs that you have to run up those steps and get on that bus. Then I run up the stairs, and there's not a bus there, but there's a whole line of different kinds of officials across this piazza that goes into the papal palace. And they're all sort of encouraging me, run, 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 go over to that elevator. And I'm hot and sweaty and carrying stuff, and I'm running, and I'm like, what is this all about? I get to the elevator. If you've been to Rome, you know there's these very distinguished gentlemen. Apparently it's a family for centuries. They wear plum tails, right? And they have white starched shirt and a white starched bow tie, and they're just very dignified. And here I am, hot, sweaty, discombobulated, confused, and you know, yes, Signorina, I'm here. I'm okay. So we get in the elevator, get upstairs, and there's another one to meet me. And we must have walked through about 15 papal palace rooms, you know. And I'm looking around, but I'm running, and he's nice, slow, dignified strides, and I'm hot and sweaty, discombobulated. And we get to this room, and I see the Holy Father's coming through the door. And I stand, you know, basically with my back against the wall to let him pass. And they said, well, they're waiting for you. I said, they're waiting for me. Holy Father's waiting for me. So I go in, and there's 3 smart aleck priests that are around the Holy Father. And one of them, this is surprising for a Canadian, no offense to any Canadians here, but they're not usually smart aleck. And the Canadian said to me, you know, you're late. You could be excommunicated. Okay. So the Holy Father, the beautiful, beautiful, warm, loving face, takes my hand. And
is
he
this
said,
Francis or Benedict?
This is Francis.
Okay.
This is just 2 years ago. I'm still recovering. Pope Francis takes my hand with his 2 hands, and he says, you are excommunicated. I'm not compos mentis anyway, you know, but I really am discombobulated, and I don't know how to take this, you know, and I'm just, no, oh, Holy Father, Holy Father. That is funny. I mean, it is funny. It is funny. I can see the humor in that. I said, but you know, I mean, really, Holy Father, and then second time he says, no, you are excommunicated. I was begging him, you know, I said, no, Father, Holy Father, no, that would be the worst thing in the whole world. I'm just as sincere as I can be. Please don't, you know. And so then finally he says, no, you are not excommunicated. I think it lasted for about 6 seconds. And, but really, I was, oh my gosh, I could barely remember it afterwards. I said, what happened in there? And of course, the other people were they were rolling in laughter. I mean, and so I had brought with me a copy of a CD that I had called The Theology of the Old Body, a talk I've given. Now, you're not allowed to take anything in those rooms. You have to put them in some antechamber. But of course, I made a circular route there, and I had my coat and my 2 big bags, and so I'm taking stuff out to get to that and handing them. I almost handed my computer to the Holy Father. The Holy Father did. So I'm taking stuff out of this bag, handing to these 3 priests, and finally I pull out my Theology of the Old Body CD, and I give it to the Holy Father. I said this, I don't know what language I'm speaking. Mikhail might be able to figure it out for me. It says something like, this is a talk, Theologia de Corpore Antiquae, or something like this, you know, and you know, he looks at me, and I said, well, you know what, it's about you and me, Holy Father. We both have old bodies. And he says, oh, you, me, not you, right? So that's my excommunication story. And there's just a little addendum to that, which is that I live with the famous Mary Healy, much more distinguished than I am. She is on the International Biblical Commission, and 3 weeks earlier, she'd been in Rome, was staying at the Casa Santa Marta, which is where the Holy Father lives, and was supposed to have, their little 6-person commission was supposed to have a meeting with him, but it never happened. She saw him a couple times in the cafeteria, but never happened. But she got in an elevator with the Holy Father, Cardinal Pell, and a cleaning lady, right? Now, when I heard that story, I thought, I'll never have a better story. And I'll never have a better story than that, right? That's incredible. The Holy Father, Cardinal Pell, and a cleaning lady in an elevator. Now, Mary has told no one that story. I tell everybody that story, and there's some various punchlines, and you can give a punchline if you want, but there's various punchlines that you could use there. And so 3 weeks later, God gave me 2 women living in the same house in Ypsilanti, Michigan, had extraordinary encounters with the Holy Father within 3 weeks' time. Like, what's going on there? Well, I figure it's because God knows that I know what to do with the story, right? And she doesn't. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.